This woman literally padlocked my driveway and accused me of trespassing on my own family's land. Worst mistake she ever made. I'd been gone 3 years, only to come back and find steel chains and a private community sign blocking the mountain road my great-grandfather carved out in 1923. But here's what stunned me most. While I was away, 8 multi-million-dollar mansions had popped up like weeds, choking my once pristine valley. The crunch of gravel under my boots should have felt like home. Instead, the pine scent I'd been dreaming about was drowned out by the cloying designer perfume of a woman stepping out of a white Range Rover as if she owned the mountain. Blonde bob, clipboard clutched like a weapon, attitude sharper than broken glass. Well, the hermit returns. This is private property now. You're trespassing. I kept my voice level. Ma'am, that's my cabin up there. My family's owned this land since 1923. Her smile looked cold enough to freeze lava. Not anymore, it isn't. What she didn't realize was that I didn't just own that century-old cabin. I also held the mineral rights under every one of her precious mansions. What would you do if some HOA tyrant locked you out of your own land? Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I know plenty of you have HOA war stories. My name's Declan Forrester. Deck to anyone not trying to serve me legal papers. I'm 48, spent most of my adult life on oil rigs from Texas to North Dakota, the kind of work that leaves your hands permanently stained and your back screaming by 40. But it paid the bills when life decided to hit me hard. But great-grandfather homesteaded this valley in 1923-3. 120 acres of untouched Colorado. Wilderness anchored by a log cabin he built with his own. Hands strong enough to weather nearly a century of mountain storms. That cabin wasn't just a roof. It was a legacy. The place where 3 generations of foresters learned that nobody owes you anything. And self-reliance isn't a motto. It's survival. Then my mom got Alzheimer's. Overnight, every paycheck went to the best memory care facility in Denver, while I worked North Dakota's fracking fields and she slowly forgot my name. The taste of petroleum still lingers in my coffee, a reminder of what I sacrificed to give her dignity in those last years. The cabin sat empty, collecting dust and memories while I collected paychecks in the frozen wasteland. She passed away 6 months ago, peaceful, finally free. With her funeral behind me and my conscience clear, I was ready to come home and remember how to be human again. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The valley that greeted me looked like a luxury magazine had thrown up on my childhood. Where wildflower meadows once bloomed, flawless green lawns now stretched like artificial rugs. The sharp tang of fertilizer smothered the mountain's wildflower scent. 8 glass and steel behemoths dominated the land, each one worth more money than my family had seen in 3 generations, and reigning over this environmental crime scene like a bargain bin Disney villain was Vivian Ashworth. Picture your worst HOA nightmare. Give her a Dallas real estate license and enough cash to buy a small country. 54, blonde bob sharp enough to cut glass. And a smile that says she's calculating your net worth while pretending to care. Word around town was she swooped in 2 years ago under some shell company, buying up land faster than a poker shark with marked cards. Then she crowned herself Queen of Pine Ridge Estates. After our roadside meet-cute, Queen Viv handed me a manila envelope thicker than a phone book, 47 separate violation notices for the cabin that had been here 50 years before her grandparents. Get this, non-compliant roof color. Apparently my great-grandfather's natural cedar shingles, weathered silver gray by decades of mountain storms, didn't fit their architectural palette. Unauthorized outbuildings. That would be the 1920s root cellar that kept my family alive through the Great Depression. Landscaping violations, because God's own wildflowers aren't on their approved plant list. The grand total? $73,500 plus $500 a day until I complied. But what really got under my skin wasn't just the legal extortion disguised as community standards. It was her tone on certain words, the kind that makes your jaw clench. The way her nose wrinkled when the wind carried the honest scent of work clothes. The subtle digs about transient lifestyles and questionable associations. This woman had never done a day of real work in her manicured life. But somehow I was the cancer dragging down her property values. The paperwork gave me 30 days. Pay up or face liens and foreclosure. 30 days to comply with rules I'd never agreed to from an organization I'd never joined, over land my family had owned since before her parents were born. That evening, I drove my rust bucket F-250 to the county courthouse, its diesel engine coughing like an old smoker. Jolene Carpenter was locking up. She'd been clerk there since the Carter administration. "Deck Forrester," she said, her smile warm but tinged with sympathy. "Welcome home, honey. I'm real sorry about your mother." After thanking her, I asked about the HOA filings. Jolene's face shifted from friendly to grim. A lot of politics around that development. Things got rushed through faster than a greased pig at county fair. The HOA covenant documents, filed just 18 months earlier, read like a dictator's fantasy. Page after page of legalese giving Vivian Ashworth power over everything from mailbox colors to guest limits. But here's where it got interesting. My signature was nowhere on those documents. Not on any of them. Knowledge nugget. In Colorado, HOA covenants need unanimous consent from all affected property owners to be legally binding. Takeaway, just because your neighbors signed doesn't mean you're automatically bound. Always check that your property is actually included in the legal documents. Driving home under stars clearer than my legal situation. One question burned in my mind. How does a brand new HOA claim authority over a century-old homestead they can't legally touch? What I didn't know yet was that my family had left me something far more valuable than just that old cabin. A week later, I was on the porch enjoying real coffee, not the motor oil they served at. North Dakota truck stops when the peaceful silence shattered under the crunch of expensive tires on gravel. 3 vehicles rolled up my driveway like a suburban invasion force. Viv's white Range Rover led, followed by 2 BMW SUVs full of people who looked lost on their way to a country club. Their combined cologne reached me before. They even stepped out. Viv emerged in what could only be described as a safari costume from REI's priciest. Rack designer hiking boots so pristine they'd clearly never touched dirt. 3 middle-aged clones followed, all in matching outfits, gripping clipboards and cameras like they were entering a war zone. "Morning? Mr. Forrester!" she called out, her fake sweetness enough to rot your teeth. "We're here for your mandatory architectural compliance inspection." I stayed in my chair, savoring my coffee. "That's funny. Don't remember sending out invitations." "The HOA Architectural Review Committee has full authority to inspect all properties for covenant compliance," she declared, waving papers like a magic wand. "Section 4.7 of the community bylaws." Her little squad started snapping pictures of my cabin, my truck, my woodpile, probably my morning stubble if they could zoom in far enough. Shutters clicked like machine gun fire, mixed with their whispered comments about structural deficiencies and aesthetic disasters. "Ma'am," I said, standing up slow, "this is private property. You weren't invited, and you sure don't have permission to turn my home into your personal photo shoot." Viv's smile turned predatory. "Actually, we do. Section 4.7 clearly states, Section 4.7 of covenants I never signed," I cut her off. "Documents that don't apply to property never legally included. Now I'm asking you once, politely, to get off my land." Her face went from pale to lobster red in 3 seconds flat. She herded her committee back to their vehicles like a frustrated camp counselor, but rolled down her window for a parting shot. "You'll regret this attitude. Mr. Forrester, we have ways of dealing with troublemakers who don't respect community standards." The next morning, my mailbox looked like a paper bomb had gone off. 14 separate violation notices, each one stamped with official HOA letterhead and signed in Viv's angry chicken-scratch handwriting. Unpermitted structures, my great-grandfather's 1920s outhouse, now a charming historical relic, apparently violated modern setback rules improper. Vehicle storage, my F-250 parked in my own driveway didn't meet their aesthetic standards. Landscaping. Non-compliance, wildflowers blooming here since the Cretaceous period, weren't on their approved plant list. But my favorite? Unauthorized outdoor equipment storage. They were fining me for a splitting maul and a stack of firewood. Tools that had kept my family warm for generations were now an eyesore threatening. Their property values, each violation carried a $500 fine plus daily penalties until corrected, as I sorted through their bureaucratic blitzkrieg, paper cuts stinging my fingers. I noticed something that made me smile for the first time all week. Mini twist. The metadata on their violation photos showed timestamps from 3 days before their so-called inspection. These clowns had been trespassing on my property all week, photographing my home from every angle, planning their paper assault like a suburban military op. Time for my counterpunch. Radio Shack still survives in small mountain towns. Bless their obsolete hearts. I spent the afternoon there picking up a trail camera system, 6 units with night vision, motion detection, and audio recording. Colorado's a one-party consent state. On my property, every word they spoke now belonged to me. Within 48 hours, I struck gold. The cameras caught Viv and 2 committee members creeping around my land at dawn like bargain bin ninjas, taking photos and holding what looked like war councils right there. The audio was crystal clear, Viv's voice. We need documentation of every possible violation. The more we can stack up, the faster we can pressure him into selling. One committee member, what about environmental violations? Could we claim his septic system is contaminating groundwater? Viv purred, brilliant, I'll call county health tomorrow. Emergency contamination concerns always get immediate response. Knowledge nugget. Photographing private property from public land is usually legal, but trespassing to gather evidence is a crime, and it can void any legal case based on that evidence. Takeaway: trail cameras are worth their weight in gold when you're fighting HOA harassment. Bullies thrive in the shadows. Drag them into the light. Armed with video proof of their conspiracy, I had options. Call the sheriff, press harassment charges, lawyer up, go nuclear. Instead, I let them keep digging their own grave. 25 years on oil rigs teaches patience. When you work around equipment that'll kill you if you rush, you learn to think 3 moves ahead. Viv was running on pure emotion and suburban entitlement. I was playing chess while she was still figuring out checkers. Like clockwork, my phone rings the next morning. Deck, it's Earl Dawkins from County Health. We've received a complaint about septic violations on your property. Earl, I say, my grandfather built everything here to outlast us all, but if the rules say you've got to check, then by all means, bring your full testing kit. I want everything documented officially. 3 hours later, Earl's standing over the system, shaking his head like he's seeing a ghost. Son, your septic setup is cleaner than most brand new installs. Whoever filed this report was either clueless or lying outright. I hand him a USB drive loaded with highlights from my trail cameras. Earl, I think you'll find this footage interesting, especially the part where they talk about making false environmental complaints. As his county truck winds down the mountain trail, I pour another cup of strong coffee and watch dark clouds building over the valley. The air smells like rain and payback. Viv thought she was playing hardball. She had no idea the whole game had just flipped. 2 days after Earl's visit, I'm out back splitting firewood when I hear vehicles grinding up the mountain again. Not the purr of luxury SUVs this time, the growl of county trucks mixed with what sounds like a news van. 3 official vehicles park in my drive: County Health Department, a building inspector, and a man with a clipboard who introduces himself as a state environmental compliance officer. Behind them, a local news crew is setting up cameras like they're about to film a disaster movie. Earl Dawkins steps out of the health department truck looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Deck, I'm really sorry about this. We got 3 more complaints yesterday. Anonymous tips about major health hazards and environmental contamination. The state ordered a full hazmat response. The building inspector, a wiry man named Peterson, who looks equally miserable, starts snapping photos of my cabin's foundation. Reports of structural instability and code violations threatening neighboring properties, he mutters. Meanwhile, the environmental officer, his badge reads Rodriguez, suits up like he's about to step into Chernobyl. We've received allegations of groundwater contamination, illegal septic discharge, and improper waste disposal, he explains. I can smell the setup from a mile away. The timing's too perfect, the complaint's too synchronized. But what really makes my blood boil is the news crew filming every angle, making my family's century-old homestead look like a toxic dump. Gentlemen, I say, keeping my voice steady though I want to throw someone off the mountain. Inspect whatever you need. But I'd appreciate knowing who filed these complaints. Earl shifts uncomfortably. Anonymous tips through the state hotline deck. While they're setting up, I spot something that sends my anger spiking. The reporter's interviewing someone just out of frame. A flash of platinum blonde hair and designer hiking boots confirms it. Viv orchestrated this whole circus, media included, to humiliate me into selling. Time for a little counterintelligence. I walk over as the reporter finishes with Viv, who's wearing her concerned citizen mask that wouldn't fool anyone who knew her. "Excuse me," I say politely. "I'm Declan Forrester, the property owner. Since you're covering this story, I've got information your viewers might want to see." The reporter, young, eager, thinking she's uncovered a scandal, lights up. "Of course, Mr. Forrester. What would you like the public to know?" I pull up a screenshot on my phone. "I'd like them to know that the person you just interviewed has been trespassing on my property for weeks, taking illegal photos, and I have video proof of her discussing filing false reports with county agencies." Viv's face goes pale, then crimson, then almost purple. You can't, this is harassment." "Ma'am," the reporter cuts in, suddenly fascinated. "Are you saying you have documented evidence of the complainant trespassing and discussing false reports?" Before I can reply, Earl yells from behind the cabin. "Deck, you'd better see this." The hazmat team has their gear around my septic system. Rodriguez is holding an electronic detector that should be screeching if there's contamination. "It's dead silent, Mr. Forrester," Rodriguez says, removing his mask. "I've never seen readings this clean." "Your system doesn't just meet standards, it exceeds them. Whoever reported contamination was grossly misinformed or deliberately lying." Peterson, the building inspector, looks just as baffled. "Sir, I've done this 15 years. Your foundation's solid granite and steel meets modern earthquake standards. These reports claimed imminent collapse, but this place could probably take a direct hit." The taste of vindication is sweeter than my morning coffee, but I'm not finished. "Gentlemen, if you're looking for actual violations, you might want to test the runoff from those new mansions down in the valley. I've noticed odd discoloration in the creek after heavy rains. Knowledge nugget: anonymous complaints to government agencies can be traced through Freedom of Information requests, and filing false environmental reports is a federal crime with steep penalties. Takeaway: when you're targeted with coordinated harassment through official channels, document everything. Filing false reports often carries harsher penalties than the violations alleged. As the team packs up, the reporter corners me for a longer interview. I hand over selected trail cam footage, explain the harassment timeline, and suggest she might investigate the fast-track approvals for the Pine Ridge development. This is quite a story. "Mr. Forrester, mind if we do a follow-up about HOA overreach and harassment?" she asks. "Ma'am, I'd be honored," I reply. "But next time, you might want to check your sources before showing up with hazmat suits." As the convoy rolls away, I see Viv by her Range Rover, frantically on the phone. The wind carries bits of her conversation. "Damage control, legal options. This wasn't supposed to happen." The environmental officer stops by my porch before leaving. "Off the record, Mr. Forrester, you should know we've been getting similar false reports about properties in Texas and Florida. Same pattern. Anonymous tips, coordinated timing, always aimed at people in disputes with certain HOA companies." Interesting? Very interesting. That evening, I dig into Vivian Ashworth's background. Turns out our HOA queen has left a trail of shady property disputes across 3 states, each one involving environmental complaints, harassment campaigns, and suspiciously cheap acquisitions. The puzzle pieces are coming together, and the picture's uglier than I imagined. But if Viv wants to play dirty, she's picked the wrong opponent. I spent decades in an industry where cutting corners can kill. She's about to learn what real due diligence looks like. The gloves are off. Next morning, I wake up to find my power cut. Not weather. Not a fuse. Someone called the electric company claiming dangerous violations, requiring immediate shutoff. The smell of kerosene from my emergency lanterns brings back childhood camping memories, only this isn't voluntary. I'm boiling coffee over a camp stove when the phone rings. An automated message from the electric company saying service is suspended pending safety inspection and HOA approval. HOA approval for electricity. On my own property, I'm still processing this bureaucratic lunacy when a courier shows up with a certified letter. He looks like he'd rather be serving papers to real criminals. The envelope is thick. Printed on high-end letterhead. Ashworth, Sterling, and Associates. Real estate law inside are 47 pages of legal jargon boiling down to pay $250,000 in damages and compliance. Fees or get sued into the Stone Age. They claim my non-compliance has wrecked community property values and my hostile attitude amounts to interference with business relations. I have 72 hours to respond, not pay, just respond. The message is clear. Hire expensive lawyers or get steamrolled. But here's the insult. The firm's senior partner is Rex Sterling, as in Vivian Ashworth's husband. They're not just corrupt. They're blatant. While reading their threats, I spot something that makes me smile for the first time all morning. The lawsuit claims damages starting January 1st, but county records show I didn't return to Colorado until March. They're alleging 6 months of damage from a man who wasn't even in the state. Amateur hour. Time for counter research. I spend the day at the county library. Their internet is faster than my spotty cabin connection, and I need to dig deep. What I find makes my oil rig days look like child's play for complexity. Vivian Ashworth isn't just a suburban tyrant with a control problem. She's been running the same scheme across multiple states for nearly a decade. The pattern's identical. Buy land cheap through shell companies. Fast-track permits with friendly officials. Install an iron-fisted HOA with herself in charge. Harass holdouts until they sell at a loss. Flip for huge profits. Texas, 4 developments, 17 families forced out, currently under fraud investigation. Florida, 2 developments, 9 families, 1 federal lawsuit pending. Arizona, 3 developments, shut down by the state attorney general for racketeering. And now Colorado. But here's where her team slipped. They never checked the mineral rights history on my property. While they obsessed over surface ownership and HOA covenants, they missed that my great-grandfather outsmarted them. The original 1923 homestead patent granted not just surface rights, but mineral rights, water rights, and a perpetual access easement for mineral development. Legalese, that means I can access my minerals even if someone else owns the surface. Every one of those new mansion foundations sits on top of my mineral rights. Knowledge nugget. Mineral rights are separate from surface rights and often override HOA covenants, zoning laws, even some government regs because they're protected by federal mining law dating back to the 1800s. Takeaway: when fighting property disputes, always research mineral, water, and easement rights. They can outrank modern restrictions. I'm still processing the implications when my phone buzzes with a text from Earl. Deck, heads up. The State Attorney General's office is asking questions about environmental complaints here, specifically patterns of false reporting. Interesting timing. That evening, I'm reading by kerosene light when I hear the telltale sound of someone sneaking on gravel. My trail cams have night vision, but I don't need them now. 3 figures in dark clothing creep around my property, carrying spray cans and a bag of supplies. The smell of gasoline hits my nose just as I realize their plan. They're about to try to burn down a cabin built from fire-resistant cedar logs during Colorado's wet season, on property under electronic surveillance. For weeks, I step onto the porch with my grandfather's old lever-action rifle, held low. Not aimed, just visible. Evening, folks. Beautiful night for a walk, isn't it? They freeze like deer in headlights. In the beam of my flashlight, I make out 2 men and a woman in ski masks, discount bank robbers. Now, I say calmly, I'm going to count to 10. Then I'm calling the sheriff. Y'all might want to think twice about whether the paycheck is worth a felony arson rap. They drop their gear and run like their pants are on fire, stumbling through the dark toward the sound of a vehicle on the main road. But they left behind a gasoline can, 3 spray paint cans, a bag of road flares, and what appears to be a timing device. Evidence that's going to make Vivian Ashworth's legal mess exponentially worse. I call Sheriff Martinez straight away. We'd crossed paths during that fake health complaint debacle, and he'd come across as an honest cop who hated seeing his department used for harassment. Deck, what trouble now? Sheriff, I just scared off 3 people who were about to torch my property. They left enough gear to stock a fireworks stand. I'll be right up. Don't touch anything and keep that rifle ready until I get there. 20 minutes later, Martinez is photographing the abandoned arson supplies while I show him trail camera footage of the attempted break-in. Son, you just handed me enough to arrest somebody for attempted arson, conspiracy, and maybe RICO charges if we can tie them to who hired them. As he loads the evidence into his patrol car, Martinez pauses and looks at me hard. Deck, off the record, you might want to know the FBI's been asking questions about property fraud schemes in Colorado. Seems someone's been running a pattern of harassment and illegal property grabs that grabbed federal attention. The puzzle pieces are coming together, and the picture looks like it's going to put several people in federal prison. But first I've got a lawsuit to respond to. And after tonight, I think I've got some very interesting counterclaims to file. 3 days later, I'm sitting in the office of Roxanne Blackwood, a Colorado Springs property rights lawyer who takes the cases the big firms won't touch. Her office smells of old law books and strong coffee, the kind of place where actual work happens, not where billable hours are padded. "Mr. Forrester," she says, spreading a stack of documents wide enough to choke a horse, "you won't believe what my research team dug up." She slides over a thick folder labeled Forrester Mineral Rights Historical Analysis. The first page is a photocopy of my great-grandfather's original 1923 homestead patent, stamped with federal seals and signed by officials whose names ought to be in history books. "Your great-grandfather didn't just homestead 320 acres?" Roxanne says with a grin that promises revelation. According to federal records, he filed mineral rights claims covering 1,280 acres, the whole valley floor, and the surrounding ridgelines. I'm still absorbing that when she turns to the next document. Here's where it gets interesting. When your family sold off parcels in the 1970s and 80s, the deeds transferred surface rights only. The mineral rights remained tied to the original homestead patent, which means, she pauses for effect, you don't just own your cabin, Mr. Forrester. You own the mineral rights beneath every single mansion in Pine Ridge Estates. The room goes quiet, except for the fluorescent hum and distant traffic. I'm trying to process the implications when Roxanne drops the next bombshell. But wait, there's more. Under federal mining law, mineral rights include reasonable surface access for extraction, meaning you have legal authority to access your mineral holdings even if someone else owns the surface. She slides me another file. A geological survey from the 1980s showing the valley sits atop significant deposits of rare earth elements, the kind used in electronics and renewable energy tech. Mr. Forrester, based on current market prices, your mineral holdings could be worth anywhere from $50 million to $200 million. I lean back like someone just smacked me with a sledgehammer fashioned out of good news. "So let me be sure I understand," I say slowly. "Viv's been threatening to steal property that I not only legally own, but that sits above mineral rights worth more than her whole development." "That's exactly right. And here's the kicker. Every building permit issued for those mansions should have required notifying mineral rights holders. That's federal law." Roxanne pulls out another folder labeled Pine Ridge Development Permit Violations. None of the permits filed for Pine Ridge Estates included mineral rights notifications. None. Which means every single construction permit was issued illegally. The realization hits like an avalanche. Their whole development stands on illegally issued permits. It gets better. I pulled financials for Pine Ridge Estates, LLC. It's public record. Guess how much money flowed through that entity in the past 2 years? I shake my head. $2.8 million in HOA fees and special assessments. But here's the interesting part. Only $800,000 shows up in legitimate HOA expenses. The other $2 million disappeared into shell companies owned by, she pauses for effect, board members, family, businesses. My jaw drops. She's been embezzling $2 million, and that's just what we can trace. The real number's probably higher. Roxanne leans forward, her expression hardening. "Mr. Forrester, what you've got here isn't merely an HOA fight. This is organized fraud, racketeering, and potentially federal crimes, mail fraud, wire fraud, and violations of federal mining law." She hands me one last document, a letter on FBI letterhead. "This morning she contacted the federal task force investigating property fraud schemes across the Mountain West. Agent Patricia Reeves wants to talk to you. Apparently your case fits a pattern they've been tracking in several states." I stare at the letter, trying to take it all in. 6 months ago I was just a guy trying to come home and grieve. Now I'm sitting on mineral rights potentially worth hundreds of millions, holding evidence of federal crimes and holding the key to bringing down what looks like a multi-state criminal enterprise. "Roxanne, what happens next?" She smiles like a shark that's spotted prey. "Now, Mr. Forrester, we turn the tables entirely. You're no longer the defendant in this story. You're the plaintiff with legal firepower to dismantle their entire operation. The taste of justice is sweeter than I expected, but there's still work to do. First, we file for an emergency injunction to halt all HOA activity pending investigation into their legal authority. Second, we demand a full accounting of every dollar that flowed through their organization. Third, we notify every homeowner in the development that their property titles may be invalid because of permit violations." She pauses to let that sink in. And fourth, we tell Agent Reeves you're prepared to cooperate fully with the federal probe. I leave her office feeling like a different man. The mountain air tastes cleaner, the sun feels warmer, and for the first time in months, I'm not on the defensive. Vivian Ashworth thinks she's been stalking a wounded deer. She's about to learn she's been hunting a grizzly bear with a law degree and federal backing. The real fight is just beginning. Walking out of Roxanne's office, I feel like Clark Kent stepping out of a phone booth, except instead of a cape, I'm wearing mineral rights worth more than the GDP of some small countries. But having nuclear weapons and knowing how to use them strategically are different things. Roxanne's assembled what she calls a dream team. It looks more like a support group for lawyers with justice complexes. There's Marcus Chen, an environmental attorney who usually defends spotted owls, but got interested when he heard about illegal permit violations. Sarah Martinez, a financial crime specialist who left the prosecutor's office because she was tired of white-collar plea deals. And Jake Morrison, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specializes in multi-state fraud schemes. First things first, Roxanne says over coffee that could strip paint. We need to document everything methodically. Jake will coordinate with Agent Reeves at the FBI while Sarah traces every dollar that's moved through Viv's shell companies. Jake pulls out a laptop and shows a digital map that looks like something from a spy movie. We've identified similar operations in Texas, Florida, Arizona, and New Mexico. Same pattern every time: shell company purchases, rapid permit approvals, HOA harassment campaigns, forced property sales. The red pins look like contagion spreading across the Southwest. Total estimated fraud across jurisdictions. Conservative estimate, $12 million over 8 years. But that's just what we can prove so far. Marcus opens his laptop and we're staring at satellite imagery of Pine Ridge estates. Environmental violations are extensive. Illegal grading changed natural water flows. Several homes were built in floodplains without proper permits. There's evidence of contaminated construction runoff into protected watersheds. Sarah spreads financial documents that read like an accountant's nightmare. The shell company structure is designed to hide asset ownership and facilitate money laundering. Vivian Ashworth's real estate holdings across 4 states are roughly $15 million in value, all purchased with funds that don't trace back to legitimate income. I'm taking it all in when Roxanne drops the strategic bomb. Here's our approach. We let the feds build their criminal case while we pursue civil remedies. Deck, your mineral rights give us legal standing to challenge every permit, every building, every HOA action taken without proper notification. We can effectively freeze their whole operation while the criminal investigation moves forward. She pulls out a thick filing. Emergency injunction against all HOA enforcement activities. Pending resolution of mineral rights notification violations, filed this morning. Hearing is scheduled for next week. Marcus chimes in with his environmental angle. The EPA has opened a formal investigation based on our complaint. If they find violations, and they will, it could lead to federal cleanup orders and criminal charges for environmental crimes. Knowledge nugget: federal mining law requires notification of mineral rights holders before surface development. Violating those requirements can void building permits and force full environmental impact reassessments. Takeaway: mineral rights often trump local zoning, HOA covenants, and even state regulations. Always check subsurface rights when fighting property disputes, but the pièce de resistance comes from Jake, who's been quietly assembling what he calls the Community Intelligence Network. Deck, remember your neighbor Silas? Turns out he's not the only original resident keeping detailed records of HOA harassment. We've got 4 homeowners with documentation stretching back 2 years, plus 3 newcomers who discovered they were defrauded after buying properties with clouded titles. He slides over a thick binder labeled Witness Statements and Evidence. 17 people willing to testify about harassment, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, plus your trail camera footage, the financial records, and now federal agency backing. Sarah opens another folder that smells like fresh printer ink and righteous anger. Civil lawsuit filed this afternoon. RICO charges against Vivian Ashworth, Rex Sterling, and 12 co-conspirators across 4 states seeking treble damages under racketeering statutes. Which means, she pauses for dramatic effect, if we win, they're not just facing criminal charges. They're on the hook for 3 times every dollar they stole, plus attorneys' fees and punitive damages. Roxanne leans back with the satisfied look of someone about to ruin some very deserving lives. Conservative estimate, a $40 million judgment, total asset forfeiture, and federal prison terms of 10 to 20 years. The room hums with the sound of justice gearing up. What about the innocent homeowners? I ask, because despite everything, I don't want regular families losing their homes for trusting the wrong people. Marcus has that covered. Title insurance claims plus a settlement fund made from seized assets. Every legitimate homeowner gets made whole, properties get proper environmental remediation, and the valley gains permanent conservation protections. Jake snaps his laptop shut decisively. Timeline: emergency injunction hearing next week should freeze all HOA actions. FBI arrests likely within 30 days given the strength of the evidence. Civil trial starts in 6 months, though most defendants will settle once criminal charges hit. I look around at the 4 people who've decided to help a mountain hermit take on organized crime, and I feel something I haven't felt since my mom died. Hope mixed with the absolute certainty that justice is coming. So I ask, when do we start destroying these people's lives? Roxanne's smile could power a small city. Mr. Forster we already have. The smell of pine drifts through her office windows, carrying the scent of incoming victory. Somewhere in Denver, Vivian Ashworth is probably scheming her next harassment campaign, blissfully unaware that her whole criminal enterprise is about to be torn down by federal prosecutors and a man whose family has been outsmarting bullies since 1923. This is going to be fun. 2 weeks later, I'm watching the sunrise gild the mountains when the thump of helicopters shatters the morning quiet. Not a medevac or news chopper. These are federal birds, black and businesslike, circling the valley like mechanical vultures. By 8 a.m., Pine Ridge Estates looks like a federal crime scene. FBI vehicles, IRS criminal investigation vans, EPA enforcement trucks, and more federal agents than you'd need to invade a small country. The rotor wash mixes with mountain pine as helicopters ferry in evidence recovery teams. My phone floods with neighbor texts. Holy deck, what did you do? And FBI just arrested Viv at her house. News vans everywhere. They're calling it the biggest HOA fraud case in Colorado history. But the sweetest ping comes from Earl at the county health department. Deck, Wade Thornberry, just got perp walked out of the courthouse in federal handcuffs. Thought you'd want to know. Wade Thornberry, the county commissioner who fast-tracked those illegal permits. Turns out Jake's digging found a paper trail of bribes, kickbacks, and what federal prosecutors call a conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Mini twist. While I'm watching the federal circus through binoculars, my trail cameras catch something that makes me laugh out loud. Rex Sterling, Viv's lawyer husband, is trying to sneak files out the mansion's back door to a waiting car, except the FBI has the place surrounded, and he's carrying boxes labeled confidential legal files in broad daylight, where every federal camera can record his obstruction of justice. Amateur hour continues. My phone rings. Roxanne calling from what sounds like a war room full of federal agents. Deck, you won't believe this. The raid on Viv's house turned up evidence of fraud schemes in 6 states, not 4. We're talking about a criminal enterprise operating for over a decade. How bad? Conservative estimate. 43 families defrauded, $18 million stolen, and enough RICO violations to keep federal prosecutors busy for the next 5 years. Through my binoculars, I watch agents hauling hard drives, boxes of financial records, and enough evidence to fill a small library. The scene is more satisfying than my morning coffee, which is saying something. But Viv's not surrendering gracefully. By afternoon, local news airs her crisis management interviews with worried residents, talking government overreach and vindictive neighbors. She's trying to spin me as some dangerous loner who manipulated federal agencies into harassing community leaders. The irony is thick, but her media play has a fatal flaw. She doesn't know about the trail camera footage we haven't released yet. That evening, Jake calls with a report that completes the puzzle. Deck, remember those 3 who tried to burn down your cabin? One of them just got arrested trying to board a flight to Mexico with $50,000 in cash and a fake passport. Let me guess, he's singing like a parrot with a law degree. Turns out Viv hired them through her cousin's security company in Dallas, the same crew doing intimidation work for her other fraud operations across the Southwest. The dominoes keep falling. Gets better. Testimony from these guys puts Viv at the center of a conspiracy that includes arson for hire, witness intimidation, bribery of public officials, and what the feds are calling domestic terrorism for weaponizing government agencies against private citizens. That night I read by LED lantern, still no power. But now it's by choice rather than harassment, when Sheriff Martinez pulls into my driveway with his lights off. "Deck," he says quietly, "thought you should know. Federal marshals are putting a security perimeter around the valley tonight. Agent Reeves thinks Viv might try something desperate before they can arrest her associates." Desperate? How? The kind of desperate that makes people do stupid things with explosives. He hands me a radio and a federal contact card, direct line to FBI Tactical Command. "If you see anything unusual, call immediately. As his patrol car melts into the darkness, I realize this began as a property spat and has become something much more dangerous. When people face life sentences, they sometimes decide they have nothing left to lose. The mountain air tastes different tonight, charged, metallic, like an approaching storm. My trail cameras have night vision. My grandfather's rifle is loaded, and somewhere in the valley below, federal agents are watching over a community about to learn how deep corruption can run in small places. But there's something else in the air tonight, the smell of justice finally catching up to those who thought they were too clever to be caught. I settle into my porch chair with the radio close and my rifle across my knees. If Viv wants to add federal assault charges to her growing collection of felonies, he's welcome to give it a shot. The grizzly's wide awake now, and he's finished being hunted. Around midnight, my trail cams pick up movement on the access road. 3 vehicles creeping forward with their headlights off, easing toward the valley like they've got plans that only work in the dark. That's my cue to call in backup. I key the radio and murmur, "FBI Command, this is Forrester. 3 vehicles, lights out, moving tactical toward the valley. You'll want eyes on this." The reply is instant. "Copy that, Forrester. Hold position. Do not engage." Federal teams are en route to intercept. Off in the distance, I can just make out the low whine of helicopter rotors winding up. The showdown is close, and this time the cavalry's federal. Vivian Ashworth couldn't have picked a worse mountain hermit to tangle with, but the helicopters never came. By dawn, the mystery vehicles were gone, vanished like smoke, and I was left questioning whether I'd imagined the whole thing. Then Agent Reeves calls at 7 a.m. with the explanation. "Forrester, those cars were ours. Surveillance teams repositioning for today's takedown. Appreciate the alert. It shows our perimeter's tight. Today's the final sweep. We're arresting the last of Viv's network, including a few out-of-state players who thought they could sneak off before we tied them in." By noon, the headlines break. Federal arrests across Texas, Florida, and Arizona, all tied to what reporters are calling the Pine Ridge fraud conspiracy. 17 people in custody, with more expected. The financial crimes alone are staggering. $23 million siphoned from HOA fees, phony property deals, and what prosecutors describe as the biggest HOA fraud racket in U.S. history. But Vivian Ashworth? Nowhere in sight. A twist. While her crew's being hauled in, Viv spins completely out of control. According to Jake's sources, she's phoning in bomb threats to federal buildings, claiming to hold explosive evidence that will topple the conspiracy against her. The same woman who branded me unstable is now threatening federal agents with terror charges. Her mania hits its peak when she files a $100 million lawsuit against me, the FBI, the EPA, and unnamed federal conspirators, accusing us of malicious prosecution and destroying her legitimate businesses. The complaint runs 47 pages of rambling paranoia. My favorite gem? That I'm actually a covert federal provocateur planted in the valley to sabotage her development through illegal surveillance and eco-terrorism. Her attorney husband, Rex Sterling, refuses to represent her, a smart decision since he's staring at his own conspiracy and obstruction charges. Left to defend herself, Viv's filings read less like legal arguments and more like a manifesto written after binging conspiracy documentaries. That afternoon, Jake calls with an update equal parts hilarious and unsettling. Deck, you need to hear this. Viv's been calling county officials, insisting she's got smoking gun proof of a federal plot to steal her land. She's demanding they arrest you for treason against Colorado. Tell me they're not buying this? Are you kidding? After the feds busted their commissioner for bribery, the county won't touch her. They dodge her calls like she's radioactive. But here's the troubling part. She's trying to hire private security companies to defend her constitutional rights against so-called federal tyranny. That evening, splitting firewood, I spot something that chills me. Fresh tire tracks in the mud near my boundary. Heavy vehicles. Came and went while I was in town for supplies. My trail cameras should have caught them, but when I check, there's a 2-hour blackout jammed. That means professionals. I call Agent Reeves right away. "Reeves, I had visitors today. Heavy tracks, system jammed. This was professional. We've seen chatter suggesting Ashworth hired a private military contractor out of Arizona, Reeves explains. Ex-Special Forces. They market themselves as asset protection and intelligence services for wealthy clients in legal hot water. Asset protection, the sanitized phrase for intimidation, surveillance, and worse. They're good at skating just inside the law, but the feds are tracking them. The next morning brings news stranger than fiction. Viv has called a press conference announcing she's seeking political asylum in Mexico, claiming persecution by the American deep state eco-terror complex. She actually plans to flee the country. Her escape fizzles when customs agents at Denver International arrest her boarding a private jet with $3 million in cash, gold and bearer bonds. New charges pile on. Money laundering, tax evasion, attempted flight, and unlawful export of currency. She's racking up enough federal weight to ensure she'll be locked up well into retirement age. Legal nugget, fleeing while under federal indictment brings additional charges. Smuggling large sums across borders without declaration. Another crime with mandatory minimums. Bottom line, running only makes it worse. Prosecutors treat it as proof of guilt and tack on years. That night, Jake delivers more news. FBI hit the Arizona compound of Viv's Mercs this morning. Turns out they weren't just doing protection, they were running guns to Mexican cartels. Your case just helped bust an international arms ring. I'm still processing that when he drops the real win. Viv is in federal custody without bond. Rex is cutting a deal to shave down his 20-year exposure. The county commissioner's flipping for leniency. And the mercenaries are nailed with trafficking charges that carry life sentences. The taste of victory is sharper than black coffee. But the saga has one last turn. Jake, when's the trial? There won't be one. Her new public defender is negotiating a plea. Prosecutors are offering 15 years in exchange for full cooperation and forfeiture. At 64, that's a life sentence. As I hang up and look over the quiet valley, it strikes me, justice may not be swift, but sometimes it's perfectly fitting. The so-called Queen of Pine Ridge is about to be inmate Defaults whatever in a federal penitentiary. Her empire dismantled, assets seized, allies turning on each other. Yet the true victory isn't her fall. It's the healing that can finally begin. The courthouse in Denver looks like a fortress on sentencing day, ringed with cameras, FBI vehicles, and half of Pine Ridge Valley's population. Inside, the air is thick with sweat and tension. Judge Patricia Williams commands the room with an authority that strips excuses bare. Victims fill the gallery, reporters cram every bench, and federal agents stand at attention. Viv sits at the defense table looking like a shadow of herself. No designer suits, no predatory smile, just a frail figure in an orange jumpsuit, roots showing through faded blonde, face hollowed by defeat. Her exhausted public defender stands and pleads for mercy. The judge is unmoved. She has read dozens of victim impact statements, stories of savings stolen, homes lost, communities fractured. Her words slice like a blade. Mrs. Ashworth, you turned the American dream into a nightmare. You exploited the elderly, weaponized homeowner associations, corrupted officials, and when confronted with justice, you sought to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. You showed no remorse, no respect for law. Then the hammer falls, 25 years in federal prison, no parole. 10 years supervised release after. Restitution of $69 million, triple damages under racketeering law. Assets seized from homes and bank accounts to vehicles and jewelry liquidated for victim compensation. Viv breaks down, shouting about persecution, property values, and conspiracies. Judge Williams cuts her cold. You demanded much from others, illegal fees, land, loyalty. Today, this court demands justice. Federal marshals drag Viv out screaming that it isn't over, her words echoing as camera shutters fire. It is over, Agent Reeves announces to the packed courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the largest HOA fraud prosecution in U.S. history. Because victims stood strong, we dismantled a criminal enterprise and secured restitution. Roxanne leans over, asking how it feels to topple an empire. I breathe in Colorado air and answer simply, feels like I can finally go home. 6 months later, the valley is alive again. Wildflowers reclaim meadows where manicured lawns once scarred the earth. The compensation fund, largest in state history, has restored savings, homes, and hope. Families made whole. The community rebuilt stronger. Silas Huckabee, my 73-year-old neighbor, stops by for victory breakfast most mornings, grinning like a man half his age. News comes that Wade Thornberry, the corrupt commissioner, drew 8 years in prison. Justice still rolling downhill. The Pine Ridge site itself has been reborn. EPA cleanup restored water and soil, conservation easements safeguard it forever, and the gaudy mansions have been retrofitted with solar, geothermal, and eco-friendly design. The new HOA is voluntary, transparent, and democratic. No dictators, no fees, no power games. Even better. We launched the Pine Ridge Community Foundation with seized assets, scholarships, habitat restoration, and my favorite, the Mountain Veterans Retreat. Combat vets come here for real healing. No therapy circles, no corporate slogans, just work, wilderness, and peace. Viv's fortune funding veterans' recovery in the land she nearly ruined. That's justice you can taste. Roxanne later brings news that my case sparked indictments across the country, inspiring reforms and even a proposed Forester Act for federal oversight of HOA finances. Reporters call me a folk hero, patron saint of property rights. I just call it mountain justice. One evening, Jake calls. Rex Sterling, Viv's husband, sentenced to 12 years for betraying the law with his license. The last domino, and in a final twist of poetic irony, Viv has been assigned to prison laundry duty after decades of bossing others. She now washes clothes all day, just as I'm settling in. A message pings in from a veteran in Montana fighting his own HOA battle. Same tactics, harassment, fines, legal bullying. I pour another coffee, open my laptop, and start typing. Because if this journey taught me one thing, it's this. Bullies only win if good people stay silent. Pine Ridge is healed, Viv's empire is dust, but the fight goes on. And now it's time to help the next mountain man hold his ground. Justice, mountain style. Case closed.